All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Rob here for our BSPU call. Today's call is focused on podcasting. In particular, I'm going to share with you the 10 lessons that I've learned over this past 6, 7, 8 months since I started, and now over 70 episodes in of my Publish, Promote, Profit podcast. I'm going to share with you 10 things that I thought were worthy of discussion, both things that I've learned for those of you that are podcasting. This may be helpful for those of you that are thinking about creating a podcast. Then I think this may spur you to do it. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through these 10 things, and I'll keep it up on my screen because I just have it in a Word document form. Okay. So 10 things I learned from 70 plus episodes of podcasting. It's not like 70 is a lot, to be honest with you. We only have probably 40, 45 of them posted, about 70 in. That's not a ton, but these are the things that I've learned thus far. And I am committed to this process, and I am finding myself that I'm really enjoying it. So number one is, for those of you not podcasting, is probably one that will maybe touch a nerve. And that is, I really should have started this years ago. So some of you know, in my previous business back in 2009, 10, 11, even on into 2012, I did quite a bit of radio. And I certainly started it pre-podcasting, though podcasts were starting to get more and more popular, I think, in the early 2010s. And I was doing a live radio show and really built my entire financial services company via radio, some of it live, some of it with radio ads, et cetera. And you know, I was doing several hours a day often of live radio or just radio ads, et cetera. And I got a little burned out from that. So when I went all in on bestseller publishing, we had started BSP in 2011. And I sold my financial services company early 2013 and went all into BSP. I looked at radio as a potential marketing place, but to be honest, it wasn't the best place for a very narrow offer like BSP's offer. And so I just kind of dropped it. And honestly, I was happy to drop it because, as I said, I was a little bit burnt out in that regard. Several years went by and I started getting the inkling and the desire to start podcasting, doing a podcast. I saw massive success that people had in podcasting. And I certainly had at least some experience when it comes to radio and interviewing and being quick on my feet and whatnot. And I never did it. And so I just started at the beginning of the year. And so the note that I have on that is, why hadn't I started my podcast and what can be done? And of course, I have you in parentheses. If you're thinking or have been thinking for a number of years, like I had been thinking, and for one reason or another decided not to do it, there's something that is stopping you from doing your podcast. There certainly was something stopping me. The primary thing that was stopping me, because I really like that creative aspect. And I also love people and feel like I have, you know, the abilities to do well when it comes to interviewing and podcasting and whatnot. But I was stopped because of the I guess I want to say nuance of the combination of finding guests, whether or not it should be a podcast that's focused on guests, whether or not it should be a podcast focused on me just giving content. And believe it or not, the whole guest thing, booking guests, was kind of a primary drawback for me. I certainly have a staff, and I could have found a staff member that made that a focus of their job, but they were all busy doing what they needed to do. I at that time, you know, just put it on the back burner and continue to put it on the back burner because I was kind of stuck in this place of, what do I really want my podcast format to be? And really, I think a great podcast is a podcast that's focused on guests. And I don't want to be the one that's out there trying to find guests. At the same time, somebody needs to be, and I wasn't willing to invest dollars. Well, you know, years went by, and towards the latter part of last year, I was doing some work with a buddy of mine, Seth Green, and Seth has a company that does a lot of the nuance of podcasting, including booking guests. And I thought, you know what? That's been like the biggest hurdle for me. And I know if I put my money where my mouth is, then I'm going to take action and I'm going to do it. And so I needed to personally make a financial commitment and find the right team to help me to do my podcast. And I don't know that I'll stay with Seth. I signed a 1-year agreement, so that will be through December. I don't know if I'll stay with Seth. I don't know if we'll bring it in-house, but there was something really specific and easily fixable, to be honest, easily fixable. But there was something really specific that was stopping me. And I wish it hadn't stopped me, because I could have fixed that very easily by either hiring somebody. There are plenty of people, even on Upwork and contractors, that I could have gotten to do this. And I just chose to allow that one little hurdle to stop me from doing something that I enjoy, I'm good at, and really, really makes a difference. So I put that as a point, obviously to share about myself, but primarily for you to think about, if you want to do a podcast and you've been wanting to do a podcast for some time, then you got to figure out what's stopping you. And more than likely, it's a small hurdle, and you just need to overcome that one hurdle to get your podcast going. Number 2, the quality of your podcast is going to be equal to the quality of questions that you ask. And that is both ask of your guest and ask of yourself. You may have heard the adage that the quality of your life is often dependent upon the quality of the questions that you ask yourself. And so I do actually adhere to that idea. And I think when it comes to your podcast, the same is true. When it comes to your podcast and the kind of podcast that you want to have, the purpose of your podcast, your commitment to your podcast, those are questions that you need to ask yourself before you ever start it. Okay. It shouldn't be haphazard. At the same time, we're going to talk about perfectionism and procrastination in just a little bit. So you want to strike a balance between, like, being willing to pull the trigger even when everything isn't perfectly lined up, but ask yourself the questions that you need to ask about the kind of format, the kind of podcast, what your goals are with your podcast, et cetera. And then also, obviously, with your guest, do some research on your guest, right? Learn about your guest. That doesn't mean you need to read your guest's entire book, but you can read excerpts from it. You can watch a couple of other podcasts that they've done. I personally like my podcast to be organic, meaning that I want it to be very conversational. However, I do research ahead of time. So I have an idea of the questions that I'm going to ask, and then I want to see where the conversation goes. I have some experience in doing this because of live radio, but you choose what's best for you when it comes to your podcast. Maybe you want to have the same 6 questions that you ask every single podcast. I've been on podcasts that are like 6 minutes long, and it's 6 questions that you answer. And those are really popular podcasts because they're very easy for people to listen to. They're quick, et cetera, and they provide good value and content. You decide the kind of podcast that you want, but ask yourself the questions and make sure that you do the research and ask your guests the questions, because your podcast quality will depend on it. Number 3, the people are great on podcast for the most part. Look, people are great, period, for the most part. So what does that mean? Well, do research before you allow people to book on your podcast. When it comes to like a BSP client, there's no research that I need to do with you guys. You're already my clients. However, I do interview a number of people that aren't BSP clients. And I have to say, I've had some real duds on there. And that's because, Seth's team has booked some people that probably shouldn't have been on the podcast. So I've had to narrow down what I'm looking for as far as the guests that I want on the podcast. Now, that's one of the problems with outsourcing this kind of thing, right? I didn't want to do it myself. And so I outsourced it. And that meant that there's going to be a glitch here or there when it comes to getting great guests. As I said, booking guests was the hard part for me, and I needed help. And so I outsourced that piece of it. I will continue to outsource that piece of it, even if it is in-house with Bestseller Publishing. We're trying to figure that out because my contract is up towards the end of this year. So the people are great for the most part, but still understand you need to do your research on who those people are before you're having them as your guests on your podcast. Number 4, you will find some amazing opportunities in your guest. So, I've made money already with my podcast. I'll share more about that in a minute. But I've spent some money too. So I had JJ Virgin on. JJ is a 4-time New York Times bestselling author. She has an amazing community that she's a part of called Mindshare. She's the founder of it. And what Mindshare is it's a collection of like 10,000 medical professionals. They have a big conference every year. They have an amazing network group. And these are my ideal clients. So I actually interviewed JJ, fell in love with her. We clicked immediately. She said, look, Rob, I don't have any, I said that she said, my clients need somebody to write their books. My clients need somebody to help them with this. Sorry, my dog's barking at the thunder and lightning that's going on outside. So if you guys know me, you know that Bob, my faithful Dogo Argentino, is always with me. So anyway, JJ was telling me, Rob, we really need somebody. Would you be interested? And it's a big check. I had to write a $40,000 check, but these are my ideal clients, and I have JJ Virgin, like the founder of this, on my side. So I think it's going to be a tremendous opportunity for me in Bestseller Publishing, and I would not have gotten that opportunity had I not interviewed her on my podcast. Kim Walsh Phillips. Kim is a great social media influencer. She has a multi-7-figure a year business. And basically what she does is teaches people how to grow their audience. So I interviewed Kim just a few weeks ago and found that Kim was doing a challenge coming up actually next week or the week after it's going to start, called 10X Your Followers. And, I'm always looking for great content, ideal content for my clients, people on my email list, et cetera. And I was like, Kim, that challenge is perfect for my audience because authors need to 10X their followers. Authors need to build their platforms. And so I became an affiliate of Kim's offer. I'm very, very careful about that kind of thing. And you'll see me talking and emailing about that next week. But I would not have known about that had I not interviewed Kim on my podcast and learned some amazing things about her as an expert. It's also great for client acquisition. Look, I know a lot of people that run a podcast with the sole purpose of bringing on new clients. Amy Dix, that's not what she does, but Amy Dix brings on new clients regularly from one of the 2 or 3 podcasts that she does. And so depending on the kind of guests that you're trying to bring on your podcast and the goal of your podcast, it can be a great method of client acquisition. I've interviewed a number of people that have asked me, can you help me with my book launch? Can you help me with my PR and media? And my team is following up with them. And we already have gotten at least one client that came strictly because they connected with me via my email list and the podcast. That's number 5. The power I have found thus far, and this is, remember, just in 6 months, the power, number 5, is in connecting with your current audience. It isn't just in building a new audience. That's a part of it. But what you're doing by podcasting is you are building a better relationship with your email list and your social media following. So I have the team, post clips as well as links for the podcast on LinkedIn and various other channels. And somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, and this was somebody that said, hey, I listened to your podcast with this person. I don't even remember which person it was. I loved what you had to say. I wonder, I'm looking to do a book. Could you jump on a call and could we talk about that? We jumped on a call. There was no selling. I didn't do a sales process or anything like that. And that person became a client after one call because they already had a relationship with me from the podcast that they were listening to. So the money is in using your voice, using your content to build a relationship with your audience. Now, my goal is to expand my audience, right? Not just build it with my current email list, but expand it in the podcast as well. And over time, that will happen. Number six is done is better than perfect. Remember, I told you we get around to being a perfectionist. Obviously, stop being a perfectionist, okay? Your podcast isn't going to be perfect. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be people on that, maybe you do an entire episode and you go, I'm never even going to air this episode. That's fine. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be as good the first podcast as you are the 100th podcast. Don't worry about that. Just know that done is better than perfect because you can perfect things as you go. There's a couple of different tools. Now, I'm not using these tools. However, I have used them in the past. Anchor, I think it's anchor.fm, is a great podcasting tool. So my buddy, Kevin Hutto, and I decided that we were going to do a cryptocurrency podcast. Now, if you know anything about Kevin and I, we always try harebrained things. And so I didn't know how long we would really be doing this podcast together, but it's like we talk about cryptocurrency almost every day, all the time. And he's like, look, why don't we just record that and let's see if anybody's interested in it. So now, fortunately, I didn't spend any money on this because I knew that this harebrained idea may not last, but we used anchor.fm. I simply recorded the video on Zoom. It was he and I talking. You download it right into Anchor FM. You click a couple of buttons, you name it, and it sends it everywhere. Well, we only did 6 episodes, right? So we didn't invest any money, time. I never emailed anybody about it, never told anybody about it. And we had, hundreds of listens of our 6 podcasts, just using Anchor FM. And I'm talking about, very simple cover art. The whole thing was simple. So if you're not 100% sure, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can use tools like Anchor FM to just start getting your podcast out there on Apple, on Spotify, etc. For those of you know who Dean Jackson is, if you don't, Dean is a legend in the direct response marketing industry. I've known Dean for a long time, since the early 2000s when he was in real estate with Joe Stumpf, and I was in real estate at that time. And Dean does a very kind of low-tech and simple podcast, and his podcast is responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in revenue. And the entire podcast is nothing more than him on his phone. He hits record. He does this. And with his guest, all he's doing with his guest is showing his expertise by helping his guests. So if a guest needs marketing advice or marketing direction, Dean has them on the podcast. He records it on his iPhone. He has it set up with Dropbox, so it goes to his team. His team does a quick edit and then puts it into Anchor or one of these services. And he has made hundreds of thousands of dollars per year doing a very, very low budget, done is better than perfect podcast. Okay. So you don't have to have everything right for it to go well. If your content is great, then that is going to be what attracts people. Number seven, you need to find a way to multiply your content if you're really going to be doing this. So how do you multiply your content? Well, if you start with video and you use something like, say, Zoom, and you record the video, well, now you have something that can be part of your YouTube channel. You can then strip out the audio, and the audio can be your podcast, which goes to all the podcast platforms. You can then either yourself or have somebody write a blog post and even take some quotes and clips from that. So in other words, one piece of content, a video, can then be turned into YouTube, can be turned into your podcast platform, can be turned into a written blog post, can be turned into clips, etc. That is what we do. So what we do is we shoot it all on video. Every single guest knows that they're going to be doing this on Zoom with me. So they come with a dedicated Zoom link. We record, and then that becomes the podcast and everything else. Number 8, use this to multiply your social reach, including your email. So what do? Well, I am not just, and this is kind of also connected with number 5, connecting with your audience. I'm not just looking for a brand new audience with the podcast. I'm looking to like further engage my current audience with the content that I'm creating. So, I have a current audience that I've been speaking to in one way or another for 10 years on this topic. So, at times I go radio silent, right? And so, what happens when you go radio silent is people stop paying attention, people don't remember you, et cetera. Well, your podcast is a great way to continually put brand new content in front of them. Video clips on YouTube, audio clips on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, snippets, quotes, things of that nature you can put and use on all of your social media channels and your email to simply keep your clients engaged, keep teaching them, keep helping them. Okay, so this is a great way to engage and grow your social reach as well as your podcast reach. Number nine, it grows slowly. So we are growing every single month. It's not the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of downloads that I would like. It's not. But to be honest with you, I didn't, and this is very unlike me, but I use the done is better than perfect. I did not do a full big podcast launch at all. I just said, I want to get this going. I want to get better at it. I want to produce great content, et cetera. And I should have had a better launch and marketing plan. Now, with that said, I'm going to be spending money. I'm going to be focused on this because I've shown myself that I'm committed to it with 70 plus episodes in 5 months. So I know I'm going to be doing this. I want to do this long term. I see the benefits of it. We've already made money from it. And so now the goal is, okay, how can I grow this podcast base on Apple, iTunes, on Spotify, in other places? To do that, I am going to have a great launch and marketing plan. Not going to go over details with you on that. Just know that as I formulate that and as I get help from other people that are good at this, I will document everything and I'll show you exactly how I've done it. I'll give you numbers and everything, just like I do on everything that I do. Number 10, and kind of lastly is fun. I have listeners in Tanzania and dozens of other places, that I didn't even know there were still countries, or places like that. That's kind of fun. It's kind of cool to know that, I have listeners in dozens of different countries that are downloading my content and listening to what I have to say and the interviews that I do. It's surprising how big of a reach you can have by simply, being consistent, sharing good information, talking to interesting people, telling stories, and giving good advice and help. And so my expectation is that this will only grow as I continue to do it. In fact, every single month, my statistics are going up, 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 which is fantastic. And I'm hoping that with a launch and a big marketing plan, we'll start seeing some exponential growth.